The salvage crew had been working in the debris field for weeks, scanning orbiting wrecks for anything of value. It was a harsh, lonely job. The cold of space was relentless, and the silence, except for the faint hum of their ship's systems, made them feel as though the universe was holding its breath. Most of the ships they encountered were old human freighters or satellites, long abandoned and barely holding together. But then came a blip on their sensors that made everyone stop what they were doing. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The shape of the ship was strange, asymmetrical, almost organic in its design. No human company had built anything like it, not in the records available to the salvage industry. Its metal was a dull gray, with patches that glimmered like glass, as if it had been partially crystallized over time. The ship appeared dead. No energy readings, no signs of life. And yet it had survived, orbiting silently for decades, untouched by other scavengers or collisions. Captain Hayes, a man in his late 40s with a gruff voice and calm demeanor, called the team together in the control room. "I don't know what this is," he said, pointing at the screen, "but it's ours if we can get to it. Prepare the suits. We're going in." The crew suited up carefully, checking every system in their exo-armor suits. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that they were stepping into the unknown. Salvage work always carried risks, but this felt different. The ship didn't just look old, it felt alien. They docked the small salvage craft with one of the ship's airlocks, which surprisingly opened with a faint hiss, as though it had been waiting for someone. Inside, the corridors were narrow and dimly lit, with panels and machinery unlike anything they had seen. Strange markings covered the walls, geometric patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly under their lights. No human symbols, no language they recognized. The crew moved cautiously, their boots echoing on the smooth metallic floor. Debris floated lazily through zero gravity, small pieces of equipment that had been abandoned or torn loose. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Then came the discovery. In a sealed chamber at the far end of the ship, they found a pod. It was sleek and smooth, with a soft blue glow emanating from its surface. Most pods in their line of work were clearly human stasis units for cryogenics or medical emergencies. But this one was different. It didn't have buttons, switches, or visible interfaces. It just existed, humming softly, as if alive. Dr. Elise Morgan, the team's medic, stepped forward, her gloved hands hovering over the pod. "It's active," she whispered, barely able to believe what she was seeing. "But there's no human inside. Whatever's in there, it's alive." Somehow. They spent hours studying it, scanning and recording every detail. Finally, Captain Hayes made the decision to bring it back. It was a risk if the pod contained something dangerous. It could threaten their lives. But leaving it there in the void of space felt like abandoning something that might need help. And no one wanted to be the crew that discovered life and did nothing. Back on the salvage ship, the pod was placed in a secure area, isolated from the crew for safety. Yet even separated, it seemed to radiate a presence, a quiet awareness that made the team uneasy. It was more than just a machine. It was something alive, something watching, though it remained still. Days passed. The crew grew restless, debating what to do. Scientists were consulted remotely, but no one could make sense of it. The pod's material wasn't from Earth, nor anywhere they had records of. It resisted all attempts to open it. And then, one morning, a subtle shift occurred. The pod's surface began to change, softening like liquid, forming a seam that slowly opened to reveal a small figure inside. It was a child door, at least it looked like one, pale with delicate features and large dark eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware for someone so small. Her skin had a faint luminescence, and tiny patterns moved beneath the surface, like veins of light. The crew froze, unsure of how to react. This was no human child, and yet she was undeniably alive. Dr. Morgan was the first to approach, her heart pounding. "We have to help her," she said. She's just a child." The pod opened fully, and the child blinked slowly, looking around the room. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet curiosity. She reached out with a tiny hand, touching Dr. Morgan's glove, and the medic felt a strange warmth. Almost as if the child's touch was alive with energy, the crew decided to keep the discovery a secret. Word of an alien child would create panic, legal battles, and government intervention that could tear them apart. They moved her to a specially prepared room on the ship, providing basic care while they tried to learn more about her. Feeding her was difficult at first. She had no obvious mouth movements, no known dietary needs. But slowly she adapted to human food, consuming it with small, careful gestures. Watching the crew with eyes that seemed to understand more than she should, every day brought new surprises. She could recognize each crew member, anticipate their movements, and respond with emotions that seemed almost human curiosity, joy, fear, even humor. As the weeks went by, the crew became attached. What began as a professional obligation grew into something deeper. They argued, laughed, and cried together, united by the care of a child who didn't belong to anyone, yet belonged to all of them. But the presence of the child raised difficult questions. Where had she come from? Why was she alone? Was her species extinct? Or had they sent her as a last hope? The more they learned, the more they realized the truth. They were not just taking care of a child. They were custodians of a living legacy, a being whose existence could alter the understanding of life itself. Captain Hayes, though practical and cautious, admitted late one night to Dr. Morgan, "Whatever we do from here, we have to protect her. She's more important than any salvage, any mission, any rule. We can't let the world see her. Not yet." And so, the crew made a pact. They would raise her, keep her safe, and try to understand her. They didn't know how she would change their lives, or the lives of their descendants. But they knew one thing for certain. Their discovery had already altered the course of their future forever. In the quiet of the ship, under the dim blue glow of her pod, the child slept peacefully. Outside, the stars continued to shine, indifferent to the small, fragile life that had just joined the human family. Inside, however, every heart on that ship beat with a mixture of awe, fear, and hope. They had found something extraordinary in the cold emptiness of space, a life that was not human, yet would become inseparable from humanity, and no one aboard that ship would ever be the same again. Raising the child was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. They had taken care of humans before, children who were sick, injured, or lost. But this child, Lyra, as they had named her, was unlike any human. She grew slowly, yet each day brought new surprises. Her body was delicate and pale, with a faint glow that seemed to pulse softly beneath her skin. Her eyes were unusually large and dark, reflecting light in a way that made them seem almost endless, like looking into a deep, calm ocean. The crew quickly realized that Lyra was incredibly intelligent. She learned to communicate faster than anyone expected. Within days, she was mimicking words, then forming sentences. Her voice was soft but clear, almost musical, and when she spoke, it was with a careful understanding of the meaning of each word. She seemed to absorb knowledge the way a sponge absorbs water, watching, listening, and processing everything around her. Dr. Morgan, who had become her primary caregiver, marveled at her abilities. "She's learning faster than any human child I've ever studied," she told Captain Hayes one evening. "It's like her brain is wired differently. She doesn't just memorize, she understands." Despite her intelligence, Lyra was still a child in many ways. She laughed easily, sometimes with a quiet melodic giggle that echoed through the ship's corridors. She was curious about everything, touching objects, examining textures, and asking endless questions. Her curiosity was boundless, and it often led the crew into trouble. Once, she wandered near the ship's engine room, and it took a full hour to coax her back. She had only wanted to see how the lights and machinery worked. But to the crew, it was terrifying. Feeding Lyra was another challenge. She did not seem to need food in the same way humans did. At first, the crew tried offering milk, fruit, and other simple foods, but she often ignored them. Eventually, they discovered that she could absorb nutrients directly from a specially formulated solution, though she sometimes ate small amounts of human food simply to explore flavors and textures. Even more astonishing were her physical abilities. Her body healed quickly from minor scratches or bumps, far faster than a human child would. Dr. Morgan once accidentally cut her finger while preparing food, and within minutes, the wound had almost completely closed. Lyra's body seemed to regenerate itself silently, without pain or inflammation. The crew could only watch in awe, realizing that she was biologically extraordinary. Yet, Lyra also displayed emotions in ways that were profoundly human. She expressed joy when the crew played simple games with her. She showed sadness when she saw others hurt. And sometimes, late at night, she would sit quietly, staring at the stars outside the ship's windows, as though she could remember her home. Though she had never spoken of it, as weeks turned into months, the crew began to feel a deep bond with her. She was no longer just a child in a pod, they loved her. Each of them had moments when they felt protective, as though she were part of their own family. Captain Hayes, normally reserved and serious, would find himself reading bedtime stories to her, his voice soft and gentle. Dr. Morgan would sit with her for hours, explaining the world, teaching her human customs, and guiding her through emotions she was only beginning to understand. Despite their growing attachment, there were constant worries. Lyra was not human, and her presence on the ship was a secret that could not be shared. The crew feared what would happen if governments or other authorities discovered her. Would they be taken for study? Would she be treated as a threat? These questions haunted them, and each decision carried immense weight. Lyra also began to show signs of an unusual connection to the crew. Those who spent the most time near her noticed subtle changes in themselves. Minor illnesses seemed to disappear faster, energy levels improved, and small injuries healed more quickly. At first, the crew thought it was coincidence or placebo effect. But over time, the patterns became undeniable. Lyra's presence had a positive influence on their physical well-being, though the mechanism remained a mystery. The child's emotional development was equally extraordinary. She learned empathy at a level beyond most human children. She comforted crew members when they were stressed or anxious, sensing moods even when no words were spoken. She developed routines that encouraged everyone to take care of themselves and each other, creating a sense of unity and harmony on the ship that had never existed before. Education for Lyra became a complex task. The crew had to improvise lessons in science, language, mathematics, and human history. She absorbed everything quickly, often asking questions that challenged the crew's own understanding. Her curiosity about human culture was especially striking. She wanted to know why people laughed, cried, or fought. She wanted to understand human emotions in their entirety, asking questions that were simple in words but profound in meaning. One evening, Dr. Morgan observed her staring at a small model of Earth. "Why do they fight?" Lyra asked softly. Her eyes reflected a sadness that seemed far beyond her age. "Why do humans hurt each other when there is so much beauty?" Dr. Morgan did not have an easy answer. She knelt beside Lyra and said, "Sometimes people forget to care, or they are afraid. But many also try to do good to help each other. That is why your presence here is important. You remind us to be better." Lyra seemed to understand. She touched Dr. Morgan's hand, a gesture of comfort and connection, and the warmth they felt was almost tangible. It was a moment that marked the deepening bond between child and caregivers, a bond that would only grow stronger with time as months passed. Lyra began to adapt to human routines. She learned to sleep, eat, and interact socially with remarkable speed. She developed a sense of play, inventing games and exploring the small spaces of the ship with delight. Yet even in her play, there was intelligence and awareness. She seemed to understand consequences, safety, and kindness, and she often corrected the crew gently if they made mistakes around her. Despite the joy she brought, there was also fear. Every day, the crew worried about her health, about the risks of the unknown, about what might happen if the world discovered her existence. They debated constantly, trying to balance care with caution. Each small decision felt monumental, as though the entire future depended on their choices. Lyra's presence also began to influence the crew emotionally in unexpected ways. They became more patient, more reflective, and more caring toward one another. Arguments that might have escalated quickly resolved themselves with her quiet observation or a simple question. She had a way of encouraging people to be their best selves, not through force or instruction, but through her very presence. One evening, Captain Hayes sat quietly, watching her play with a floating holographic globe. "She's changing everything," he said softly to Dr. Morgan. "Not just our lives, but something deeper. I can feel it. She's not just a child we care for. She's different." Dr. Morgan nodded. "Yes, she is different. But she's also teaching us what it means to care for someone completely, without expecting anything in return. That's something humans often forget. Maybe she's here to remind us." As Lyra grew, she began showing signs of physical adaptation to her environment. She could survive temperature changes that would discomfort a human child, and her immune system seemed incredibly strong. Minor injuries healed almost instantly. Her sleep patterns were different, and yet she functioned perfectly on minimal rest. It became clear that raising her would not only be a challenge of care, but also of understanding an entirely new form of life. Despite these differences, Lyra formed deep emotional connections with the crew. She called Captain Hayes Papa, Dr. Morgan Mama, and the others by affectionate nicknames. She sought comfort in their presence, shared in their joys and fears, and became a central part of the crew's lives. Her laughter, her curiosity, and her intelligence brought life to the cold. Isolated ship every day with her was a lesson in wonder. The crew learned to see the universe through her eyes, a place of possibility, discovery, and connection. They realized that raising Lyra was not just about teaching her to be human. It was about understanding her, learning from her, and embracing a life that was bigger and more extraordinary than they had ever imagined. And so, the days passed, each one filled with discovery, growth, and the quiet joy of raising a child who was unlike anyone the world had ever known. Lyra became more than just a survivor of a forgotten ship. She became the heart of a small, secret family, shaping their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The crew understood one thing clearly. They were no longer just rescuers or caretakers. They were witnesses to something miraculous, a life that could change not only their own destinies, but perhaps the future of humanity itself. As Lyra grew older, the crew began to notice changes they could not explain. At first, they were small, subtle, almost easy to ignore. A mild cold that would normally linger for days seemed to vanish overnight. Minor cuts and scrapes healed faster than usual, and occasional fatigue disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. At first, the crew assumed it was coincidence or perhaps the result of improved morale. After all, life on the ship was stressful. Being around someone so extraordinary might simply have lifted their spirits. But over time, patterns became undeniable. Crew members who spent the most time near Lyra experienced physical benefits that could not be explained by conventional science. Dr. Morgan noticed her own immune system seemed stronger. She no longer caught seasonal illnesses as she once did. Captain Hayes, who had suffered from joint pain for years, found that he moved with more ease and experienced less discomfort. Even the youngest crew members, previously prone to minor injuries and fatigue, seemed to grow stronger and more resilient. The crew decided to monitor the changes carefully, documenting every detail. They performed routine medical tests, comparing results over weeks and months. Blood work revealed subtle differences. Some cellular markers appeared more active, while others, normally associated with aging or fatigue, were reduced. It was as if being near Lyra stimulated the body's natural ability to repair and strengthen itself. Dr. Morgan approached Captain Hayes one evening in the lab. "I've never seen anything like this," she said quietly, almost afraid to put her observations into words. "Lyra isn't just a child. She's affecting us on a fundamental level. Our bodies, our biology seems to be responding to her presence. I don't know how or why, but it's real." Captain Hayes ran a hand over his face, deep in thought. I felt it too, he admitted. I thought it was imagination, or maybe hope, but it's not. Something about her changes us. Lyra herself seemed unaware of the impact she was having. She continued to grow and learn at an astonishing pace, her intelligence and curiosity increasing daily. She became fascinated with human biology, often asking questions about why humans got sick, why injuries took time to heal, and why some people grew old faster than others. One afternoon, she sat with Dr. Morgan holding a small model of the human body. "Why do humans need so long to repair?" she asked softly. "I heal quickly. You heal more slowly. Why?" Dr. Morgan hesitated. "We are different. Your biology is unique. You have something that humans do not. And it seems it can share itself in a way we don't fully understand." Lyra considered this quietly, touching the model with delicate fingers. "Then perhaps I can help," she said, her voice calm and measured, though it carried a weight beyond her years. "I want to help." As months passed, the crew noticed that the benefits Lyra provided seemed to be strongest in those closest to her. Spending time with her, sharing meals, playing, or simply being near her correlated with measurable improvements in health and vitality. Scientists aboard the ship theorized that her biology released microscopic symbiotic agents, tiny organisms or molecules that interacted with human cells to enhance repair and immunity. It was an astonishing discovery, one that, if verified, could revolutionize medicine and biology forever. Yet these changes were not without consequence. Crew members reported strange dreams, vivid and sometimes unsettling, in which Lyra appeared in alien landscapes or spoke words they did not understand. Though these dreams were brief, they left lasting impressions, reshaping the crew's understanding of the universe. Some began to question the boundaries of humanity itself, wondering what it meant to share life so intimately with a being from another world. Lyra's influence extended beyond physical changes. The crew noticed emotional shifts as well. People became calmer, more patient, more empathetic. Conflicts that might have erupted into arguments or tension were resolved with ease. Even during moments of high stress, the presence of Lyra seemed to diffuse anxiety, replacing it with focus and clarity. It was as though she carried a subtle energy, a harmony that resonated with those around her. One day, Dr. Morgan observed Lyra in a quiet moment, her small hands tracing the contours of a human heart model. "I can feel it," she whispered to herself. "The life inside. It's so connected. She can sense it, and perhaps she can influence it." Captain Hayes watched from the doorway. "We're changing because of her," he said quietly. "But it isn't just us. Our children, our families, if she stays with us, they will change too. Something is happening in our bloodlines, and we don't even understand the full scope yet." Indeed, as time went on, subtle changes began appearing in the crew's offspring. Though not all members had children aboard the ship, those who did noticed that their children were healthier, stronger, and more resilient than previous generations. Growth rates were slightly accelerated, illnesses were rarer, and mental acuity was noticeably sharper. At first, these changes were attributed to improved care and environment. But even remote medical scans confirmed differences at a cellular level. The implications were staggering. Lyra, unknowingly, was shaping the future of the human families around her. Her biology was merging with theirs in ways that science could not yet explain. She was not merely a child to be raised. She was a catalyst for a new chapter in human evolution. Despite the excitement, there was also fear. The crew debated endlessly about the risks of keeping her close. What if these changes were not entirely safe? What if prolonged exposure had unknown consequences? And what of the wider world? If Lyra were discovered, governments, scientists, and organizations would demand access, possibly experimenting on her in ways the crew could never allow. Lyra, though unaware of the full consequences of her presence, sensed the concerns of the adults around her. She became cautious, observing reactions, listening carefully, and sometimes choosing solitude over interaction. Yet even in isolation, her influence persisted. Plants in the ship's hydroponics bay grew faster and stronger near her. Systems that had minor malfunctions seemed to stabilize. Crew members who entered the same room after a long shift reported feeling refreshed, as if the air itself carried vitality. One evening, Captain Hayes and Dr. Morgan sat in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "We've changed," he said softly. "All of us. Because of her. And not just physically we think differently, we feel differently. Our lives are intertwined with hers." Dr. Morgan nodded. "She is extraordinary. But she is still a child. We must protect her, even as we learn from her. She is not just a part of our family, she is something bigger. Something the world isn't ready for." Lyra herself, sitting quietly nearby, tilted her head as though listening. Though she did not fully understand the scientific explanations, she sensed the responsibility the adults felt. She understood, at some deep level, that her existence carried consequences far beyond her immediate care. And though she was still a child in many ways, she began to take her own small steps toward understanding her role in the lives of those around her. Over time, the bond between Lyra and the crew deepened. They were no longer simply caretakers. They were students, learning from her unique biology, her intelligence, and her understanding of life. And she, in turn, absorbed their guidance, their culture, and their emotions, growing into a being who was not merely alien or human, but something entirely new, a bridge between two worlds. By the end of this period, it was clear that Lyra had irrevocably altered the lives of the humans around her. Their health, their emotions, and even their perspectives on life had changed in ways that could not be undone. They were no longer the same people who had first discovered her pod in the silent, forgotten ship. They were part of something larger, something extraordinary. And the full implications of her presence were only beginning to unfold. And as Lyra slept that night, bathed in the soft glow of the ship's lights, the crew could only marvel at the quiet miracle they had been entrusted with, a child from the stars who had the power to change human bloodlines forever. As Lyra grew, the crew began to realize that keeping her hidden was becoming more difficult. At first, their isolation in the salvage ship seemed enough. Orbiting quietly in a remote sector of space, they had no visitors, no inspections, and little risk of being discovered. But over time, anomalies began to appear: communications glitches, sensor readings that seemed to react strangely around Lyra, and subtle disturbances in the ship's systems. It was as if her very presence was altering the environment, drawing attention from things they could not see or understand. The first warning came in the form of a faint signal intercepted on their long-range scanners. At first, it was dismissed as background noise, debris interference, or some distant transmission from another human vessel. But then the signals grew stronger, more focused, and unmistakably deliberate. Someone, or something, was tracking them. Captain Hayes called the crew together in the control room. "We have a problem," he said grimly, pointing at the screens. "We're being monitored. I don't know by who, but it's getting closer. We need to take precautions." The crew worked quickly to shield their communications, hide the ship's signature, and secure Lyra in the safest part of the vessel. Yet even with these precautions, unease settled over everyone. They had discovered a being who could change the course of human evolution. But now they were not sure if they could protect her from outside forces who might want to exploit her. Lyra, sensing the tension, became quieter than usual. She still played and learned, but there were moments when she would sit by herself, staring out at the stars, as if she could feel the presence of those who were watching. The crew tried to comfort her, but they knew that shielding her from the invisible eyes tracking them would be almost impossible. Dr. Morgan spent hours analyzing the signals. "It's not human," she said finally. "I've seen military and scientific transmissions, but this is different, advanced, precise. Whoever or whatever this is, they know how to find us without being seen. Lyra may be attracting attention, even without realizing it." Captain Hayes ran a hand over his face. "Then we have no choice. We protect her. Whatever it takes. She stays hidden. No one gets close. No one sees her. We've gone this far, and I'm not turning back now." The days became tense and careful. The crew implemented new protocols, limiting who could approach Lyra at certain times. monitoring every signal and preparing for the possibility of intruders. Life aboard the ship was no longer carefree. Even simple activities like eating or sleeping required vigilance. But the crew accepted it because they knew what was at stake: Lyra's safety and the future she represented. Meanwhile, Lyra began to understand, in her own way, that there were dangers around her. She noticed the worry in the crew, the sudden changes in routine, and the way people whispered and glanced at the sensors. Though she could not fully comprehend the human concepts of surveillance or threat, she understood the emotions, the fear, the caution, the need to protect. In response, she began to adapt, learning to be careful, to hide her abilities when necessary, and to observe without drawing attention. Despite the precautions, the crew realized that hiding Lyra was not enough. They needed to understand who or what was tracking them and why. Using the ship's advanced sensors, they traced the signals to a distant observation station, far larger and more technologically advanced than any human facility they knew. It was not close enough to attack, but it was close enough to gather data. Whoever was operating it had resources, knowledge, and a reach that far exceeded anything the crew had anticipated. The implications were frightening. If Lyra were discovered, the consequences could be catastrophic. Governments, scientists, and organizations would undoubtedly want to study her, experiment on her, and possibly use her abilities for purposes the crew could not even imagine. The thought of losing her, or worse, having her exploited, filled everyone with dread. Lyra, however, remained calm. She seemed to sense the danger in a way that humans could not. One night, she approached Dr. Morgan, her large dark eyes reflecting concern. "They are coming," she said softly. "I feel it. I must be careful." Dr. Morgan knelt beside her. "We know, Lyra. We're doing everything we can to keep you safe. But you must trust us." Lyra nodded, her small hand gripping Dr. Morgan's. "I trust you," she said. "But I also must understand." Over the following weeks, the crew worked tirelessly, balancing their care for Lyra with the need to remain undetected. They modified the ship's systems, creating layers of protection, false signatures, and decoys. The days were long, and the nights even longer, filled with constant vigilance and quiet fear. But through it all, Lyra continued to learn, to grow, and to show the crew that even in danger, hope and resilience could prevail. One evening, while monitoring the distant observation station, Dr. Morgan noticed something unusual. Lyra's presence seemed to interact with the signals. The sensors recorded subtle disruptions, fluctuations that were not random. It was as if Lyra herself was unintentionally masking their location, protecting them from detection without understanding how. "This is remarkable," Dr. Morgan said quietly, showing Captain Hayes the data. "She's not just passive. She's actively influencing the environment around her. Her biology. It's extraordinary. She's defending herself and us without even knowing it." Captain Hayes stared at the data in disbelief. "She's more powerful than we realized. But that also means she's even more dangerous if discovered. We have to be careful. Every step, every move, every decision matters now." As the threat of discovery grew, the crew also began to notice another change. Lyra was growing emotionally aware in new ways. She understood fear, not just in herself, but in the crew. She comforted them when stress became too much, offering reassurance through gentle touches, soft words, or quiet presence. Her empathy seemed to deepen as the dangers increased. The crew found themselves relying on her in ways they had never anticipated. Yet there were limits. Lyra, for all her intelligence and awareness, was still a child. She could not understand the full extent of the danger or the consequences of exposure. The crew had to balance teaching her caution with nurturing her growth. Every day became a careful negotiation between safety and normalcy, between learning and hiding, between life and the unknown forces that threatened them. One night, after a particularly tense day, Lyra sat alone in the observation deck, gazing at the stars. She seemed to be listening to something humans could not hear, feeling something humans could not perceive. Dr. Morgan approached quietly. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Lyra shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I am cautious. I feel them, but I am not afraid. I know you will protect me. I also know I must help." Dr. Morgan smiled gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We will always protect you. But you must let us make the decisions that keep you safe." "We cannot do it alone," Lyra nodded again, understanding the balance between her awareness and their experience. Though the challenges were greater than ever, a quiet determination settled over her. She would continue to grow, to learn, to prepare for whatever the future might bring. As the weeks turned into months, the crew remained vigilant. The signals from the observation station waxed and waned, never directly approaching but never fully retreating. Lyra's presence continued to influence the ship and its inhabitants, strengthening their bodies, calming their minds, and guiding their actions. It was clear that her influence extended far beyond what anyone had expected. But despite the protection, despite the precautions, a sense of inevitability hung over them. The crew knew that they could not hide forever. At some point, the world or something even more advanced would notice Lyra. They had to prepare, not just to defend her, but to ensure that when that moment came, she would be ready to face it with courage, wisdom, and the strength that had been quietly growing inside her all along. In the quiet moments, when the stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation windows, the crew reflected on the reality of their lives. They were raising a child from the stars, a being who could change humanity itself. They were tasked with protecting her, nurturing her, and preparing her for a future that no one could predict. And they knew, deep down, that the choices they made now would shape not only their lives, but the lives of countless generations to come. Lyra, unaware of the full scope of her influence, slept peacefully that night, a soft glow surrounding her small form. And though the unknown forces outside the ship continued to watch and wait, within the walls of the vessel, hope, care, and love endured a fragile but powerful shield against the dangers that lay ahead. Time passed, and Lyra grew into a young adolescent, a child no longer but not yet fully mature. The crew who had found her in that cold, forgotten ship now regarded her with a mixture of awe, love, and deep respect. They had raised her from the moment they discovered her, watching her learn, grow, and begin to change not only their lives, but the lives of those around them. Lyra's influence on the crew had become undeniable. Their physical health, once fragile in minor ways, had strengthened over time. Minor ailments no longer lingered, and energy levels were higher than ever. They moved with ease, healed quickly from small injuries, and found their minds clearer, sharper, and more alert. The crew began to realize that these changes were permanent, and the idea both thrilled and terrified them. It was not only their health that had changed. Their emotions, their relationships, and their perspectives on life had been transformed. Conflicts were rare. Stress was easier to manage. They felt more connected, more capable, and more compassionate than they had ever been. Lyra's presence had fostered harmony in the ship in a way they had never anticipated. As Lyra matured, she herself began to understand more about her own abilities and responsibilities. She sensed the effects she had on the humans around her and the importance of controlling them. While she had once acted without thought, now she was deliberate, careful, and aware of the consequences of her actions. She had grown not only in body and mind, but in wisdom, developing an understanding of what it meant to protect, to nurture, and to influence life in ways humans could not comprehend, despite their isolation and care. The crew knew the time would come when Lyra could not remain hidden forever. The signals they had once intercepted from distant observation stations continued to appear at intervals, evidence that advanced civilizations or organizations were aware of her existence. Yet the crew had prepared for this moment. They had taught Lyra how to manage her presence, to be cautious, and to move unseen when necessary. She had learned to balance curiosity and safety, understanding that her life and the lives of those she loved depended on her discretion as the crew planned for the future. They began to consider the long-term consequences of raising Lyra. They realized that her influence extended beyond the immediate environment. The subtle changes in their own biology were mirrored in their children and their extended families. Humans who had lived in proximity to Lyra carried traits they could not explain: increased resilience, improved health, and sharper cognitive abilities. In a sense, Lyra had become a living catalyst for evolution, quietly shaping the genetic legacy of the humans she interacted with. This realization brought both pride and anxiety. On one hand, the crew was thrilled that their small family could contribute to something so extraordinary. On the other, they worried about what might happen if Lyra's existence was discovered or exploited. They understood that the world was not prepared for such a revelation. Governments, scientists, and organizations would undoubtedly seek to control her, to study her, and possibly to replicate her abilities. The thought of losing her or seeing her used in ways they could not prevent was unbearable. Lyra, ever perceptive, seemed to sense these fears. She approached Dr. Morgan one evening while the older woman was reviewing medical scans. "I know you are worried," Lyra said softly, her voice calm and deliberate. "I can feel it. But I will not let harm come to those I love. I will protect them, even if I must leave to do so." Dr. Morgan nodded, a mixture of pride and sorrow filling her chest. "We trust you," she said. "But we will always be here, guiding you, helping you, and protecting you, as you have protected us." The crew's bond with Lyra deepened further. She was no longer simply a child to care for. She had become the heart and soul of their small, secret family. Her laughter, her intelligence, and her compassion had changed the ship into a place of harmony, understanding, and love. She had taught them patience, empathy, and the profound power of life itself. Eventually, Lyra made a decision that would mark the next chapter of her existence. Understanding that her presence, while a blessing, also carried risks, she chose to leave Earth temporarily. It was a painful choice for both her and the crew, but they understood her reasoning. By leaving, she could explore the wider universe, learn more about her origins, ensure that her influence did not bring unintended danger to those she loved. Her departure was quiet and measured. The crew helped prepare her for the journey, ensuring she had the resources, knowledge, and tools to survive and thrive beyond their care. They watched as she departed, a small, glowing figure disappearing into the vastness of space, carrying with her their hopes, love, and trust. Even after her departure, Lyra's impact on humanity continued. The crew returned to Earth and discovered that the subtle changes in their physiology, emotions, and perspectives had lasting effects. Children born to those who had lived closely with Lyra were healthier, smarter, and more resilient than previous generations. Families experienced fewer illnesses, and mental acuity was noticeably sharper. Scientists unaware of the true cause noted these as rare anomalies, statistical outliers, or unexplained phenomena. Generations passed, and Lyra's influence persisted quietly in the bloodlines of those who had known her. Though no one outside the original crew knew the truth, the genetic legacy she left behind was unmistakable. Humanity had been changed subtly, irrevocably, and permanently. Those who carried her influence were healthier, stronger, and more capable than they had been before, carrying within them a secret that had originated from a single child found in a forgotten ship among the stars. The crew, now older, would often gather to remember the years they had spent raising Lyra. They spoke of her intelligence, her kindness, and the extraordinary ways she had touched their lives. Though she was gone, the lessons she had taught them, the importance of care, empathy, and the power of life remained. They understood that the true impact of her existence would only become apparent over time, in ways no one could fully predict. Lyra herself, traveling among the stars, carried with her the experiences of her childhood and adolescence. She understood the responsibility she bore not just to herself, but to the humans who had raised her and the generations she would indirectly influence. She embraced her role with maturity and grace, knowing that her choices would shape the future of life on Earth, even if she was far away in quiet moments. The crew would gaze at the night sky, imagining her journey among the stars. They knew that she was alive, learning and growing, and that her presence in the universe was both a promise and a blessing. They also knew that, while humanity might never understand the full story, They had been part of something miraculous, a life that changed not only their family, but potentially the course of human evolution. Lyra's story became a hidden legacy, recorded only in the memories and hearts of those who had known her. To the outside world, the crew appeared ordinary, and their families seemed blessed with rare vitality. But within the bloodlines of those closest to Lyra, subtle signs of extraordinary influence persisted. Longer life, improved health, mental acuity, and a deep, explainable empathy. It was a secret that could never be shared, yet it was a legacy written in flesh, passed from one generation to the next. And so, the child who had been found in a forgotten ship, cryo-frozen and alone, became much more than anyone could have imagined. She had been raised by humans, learned from them, and in turn, changed them forever. Her influence spread quietly, invisibly, but powerfully, shaping humanity's future in ways that could never be fully measured or understood, though she was gone from Earth. Her presence remained in the hearts of those who had loved her. In the subtle improvements in human life, and in the quiet, unspoken knowledge that life could be extraordinary, even in ways that defied explanation, Lyra's legacy endured, a living reminder that even the smallest and most unexpected life could leave a permanent mark on the world in the end. The crew realized that their greatest gift had been the opportunity to raise her, and as they looked to the stars, they knew that somewhere out there, Lyra continued to grow, to learn, and to guide life itself, carrying forward a legacy that would never be forgotten, quietly changing humanity one generation at a time.